the cameras weren't supposed to be there. The red carpet wasn't planned. But, when Prince Harry and Meghan Markle stepped out of their black Range Rover on that crisp January evening in Montecito, everything changed. What was meant to be a quiet, intimate book launch for one of America's most beloved talk show hosts suddenly became the most talked about event of 2020's CXS opening month. The world had been watching, waiting, wondering what the Duke and Duchess of Sussex would do next. After years of stepping back from royal duties, building their new life in California, and navigating the complex waters of public opinion, nobody expected them to make such a bold, glamorous statement. But there they were, hand in hand, smiling genuinely for the first time in months, about to remind everyone why they once captivated hearts across 2 continents. This isn't just another celebrity appearance story. This is about second chances, unexpected friendships, and how sometimes the most magical moments happen when you least expect them. This is about how 2 people who thought they'd lost their sparkle found it again in the most surprising place, surrounded by books, cameras, and the warm embrace of someone who understood their journey better than anyone else. The night would change everything. But, first, let's go back to how it all began. The phone call came on a Tuesday morning while Meghan was in her garden, carefully tending to the tomatoes that had become her latest obsession. Harry was inside, video calling with a children's charity in London, his voice carrying through the open kitchen window as he discussed their upcoming mental health initiative. Life in Montecito had settled into a comfortable rhythm over the past year, far from the chaos and scrutiny that had once defined their every waking moment. When Meghan's phone buzzed, she almost ignored it. The number was familiar, but she hadn't heard from Oprah in several months. Not since their last quiet dinner party where they'd talked about everything except the famous interview that had changed both their lives forever. That conversation felt like a lifetime ago now, though it had only been a few years since they'd sat in that garden and shared their truth with the world. "Meghan, darling," Oprah's voice was warm but excited in a way that immediately caught Meghan's attention. "I have something absolutely crazy to ask you, and I need you to say yes before you even think about it." Meghan laughed, settling down on her favorite garden bench. "You know that's exactly the kind of opening that makes me want to say no immediately. Trust me on this one," Oprah continued, and Meghan could practically hear her friend pacing. "I'm launching my new book next week. You know, the one I've been working on about finding joy after loss? Well, my publisher decided to throw this surprise launch party, and they want it to be intimate but meaningful. Real people, real conversations, real connections." Meghan felt a familiar flutter of anxiety. Public events had become complicated since stepping back from royal duties. Every appearance was analyzed, criticized, celebrated, or condemned, often all at the same time. "Oprah, you know Harry and I have been trying to keep things low-key lately." "Which is exactly why this is perfect," Oprah interrupted gently. "This isn't about being royal or former royal or any of that nonsense. This is about friendship. About showing up for people who matter to you. About reminding the world that you're still the same woman who used to dream of changing lives through storytelling." The words hit deeper than Meghan expected. Since leaving England, she'd thrown herself into various projects, podcasts, and initiatives, but something had felt different. The spark that had once driven her to get up before dawn to film scenes for Suits, the same energy that had carried her through countless royal engagements, seemed dimmed. Not gone, but definitely quieter. "Tell me more about this book," Meghan said, standing up and walking toward the kitchen where she could see Harry wrapping up his call. "It's everything I've learned about bouncing back from the moments that try to break you," Oprah explained. "About finding light in darkness, about choosing hope when hope feels impossible. About surrounding yourself with people who see your worth even when you can't see it yourself." Harry looked up as Meghan entered the kitchen, raising an eyebrow in silent question. She mouthed Oprah and watched his expression shift to one of curiosity mixed with caution. Since their move to California, they'd learned to be selective about their public appearances, choosing quality over quantity, meaning over spectacle. "The thing is," Oprah continued, "I keep thinking about our dinner last month. Remember what you said about feeling invisible lately? About wondering if you'd lost your ability to connect with people the way you used to? Well, maybe this is the universe offering you a chance to test that theory." Meghan did remember that conversation. It had happened during one of those perfect California evenings when the sunset painted everything golden and conversation flowed as easily as the wine Oprah had brought from her vineyard. She'd admitted something she hadn't even fully acknowledged to herself, that she sometimes felt like she was performing her own life instead of living it. "What kind of event are we talking about?" Meghan asked, settling into the kitchen stool across from Harry, who had ended his call and was now listening intently. "Small gathering at my place. Maybe 50 people, max, authors, readers, a few journalists who actually care about books instead of gossip. Good food, meaningful conversations, and absolutely no red carpet nonsense. Just friends celebrating something beautiful." Harry reached across and took Meghan's free hand, squeezing gently. He'd been watching his wife navigate the strange space between privacy and purpose for months now, seeing her struggle to find the right balance between staying true to herself and staying relevant to causes she cared about. "Can I talk to Harry about it?" Meghan asked. "Of course, but, Meghan?" Oprah's voice became more serious. "I know you've both been hurt by how things have been portrayed lately. I know every public moment feels like walking through a minefield. But some of us remember who you really are. Some of us see past the headlines to the woman who left everything behind because she believed in something bigger than herself." After ending the call, Meghan and Harry talked for hours. They discussed their fears about public perception, their desire to make a difference, their children's need for normalcy, and their own need to remain authentic in a world that seemed determined to define them in ways that felt foreign and limiting. "What does your gut tell you?" Harry asked as they walked through their neighborhood that evening, a ritual they'd developed to help process important decisions away from the walls that sometimes made their house feel more like a beautiful prison than a home. "That I'm scared," Meghan admitted. "But maybe scared in a good way? Like when I was about to audition for my first real acting job, or when I agreed to that first date with you, or when we decided to leave everything behind and build this new life." Harry nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. Some fears were warning signs to be heeded, others were simply growing pains disguised as anxiety. Learning to tell the difference had become one of their most important survival skills. "And," Meghan continued, "I keep thinking about what Oprah said about her book. About finding joy after loss, about bouncing back from moments that try to break you. Maybe we're exactly the right people to celebrate that kind of message." They'd lost so much in the past few years. Privacy, certainly, but also relationships, traditions, the simple luxury of being able to make mistakes without global commentary. But they'd also gained things they hadn't expected: perspective, resilience, a deeper appreciation for authentic connections, and the freedom to choose their own path. Plus, Harry added with a grin that reminded Meghan of the mischievous prince she'd fallen in love with. "When was the last time we got dressed up and went to a party just because we wanted to?" The next morning, Meghan called Oprah back. "We're in," she said simply. "But I have one request." "Anything. No speeches from us. No formal presentations. We just want to show up as friends celebrating your achievement. Can it be that simple?" Oprah's laughter was rich and genuine. "Honey, simple is exactly what I was hoping for." As Meghan hung up the phone, she felt something she hadn't experienced in months: genuine excitement about a public event. Not anxiety disguised as excitement, not duty masquerading as enthusiasm, but real, authentic anticipation for an evening that might remind her of who she used to be and who she was still becoming. Harry found her in their closet later that day, standing in front of the section of dresses she rarely touched anymore, the ones that had been tailored for royal events and red carpets and photographs that would be analyzed for decades to come. "Second thoughts?" he asked gently. "Third and fourth thoughts," she admitted. "But good thoughts. Thoughts about showing the world that we're still here, still us, still capable of joy and friendship and showing up for people we care about." "Then, let's go show them," Harry said, wrapping his arms around her from behind as they both looked at the beautiful clothes that had been gathering dust, waiting for the right moment to shine again. Neither of them could have predicted that this simple decision to support a friend would end up changing the entire trajectory of their year, reminding them of their own power to create moments of genuine connection in a world that often felt more interested in tearing people down than building them up. But that realization was still a week away, waiting for them in the warm glow of Oprah's garden, surrounded by people who had gathered to celebrate the power of words to heal and transform. The morning of the book launch dawned crisp and clear, the kind of January day that made California feel like a gentle rebuke to winter everywhere else. Meghan woke before her alarm, as she always did when anticipation outweighed exhaustion, and found Harry already awake beside her, staring at the ceiling with that particular expression he wore when his mind was working through possibilities. Having regrets, she whispered, not wanting to wake the children who were still sleeping peacefully down the hall. Having hopes, he replied, turning to face her. Which is somehow more terrifying than regrets. They'd spent the previous evening with Archie and Lilibet, reading stories and playing games, creating the kind of normal family moments that felt precious precisely because they had to be so carefully guarded. Both children had asked why Mummy and Daddy were getting dressed up to go out, and Meghan had explained that they were going to celebrate their friend's new book, a concept that 4-year-old Archie found fascinating and 2-year-old Lilibet found utterly boring. "Will there be pictures?" Archie had asked, with the kind of intuitive understanding that children develop when cameras have been part of their reality since birth. "Probably some," Harry had answered honestly. "But the important thing is that we're going to spend time with people who care about good stories and helping others feel better when they're sad." Now, as morning light filtered through their bedroom curtains, Meghan felt that familiar pre-event mixture of excitement and anxiety. It had been months since they'd attended anything that could remotely be considered a public event, and even longer since they'd done so with genuine enthusiasm rather than duty or obligation. The day passed in the kind of careful preparation that had become second nature, coordinating with their security team, confirming timing with Oprah's people, and, most importantly, having honest conversations with each other about expectations and boundaries. They'd learned the hard way that going into public events without clear communication was a recipe for misunderstandings and hurt feelings. "What do you want to get out of tonight?" Harry asked as they shared a late lunch on their terrace, watching the ocean sparkle in the distance. "Connection," Meghan answered without hesitation. "I want to remember what it feels like to be in a room full of people and feel energized instead of drained. I want to celebrate Oprah's achievement and, maybe, if I'm being completely honest, remind myself that we can still show up authentically in public spaces." Harry nodded, understanding completely. Since stepping back from royal duties, they'd both struggled with finding the right balance between privacy and presence, between protecting their family and remaining engaged with causes and people they cared about. Some days it felt like they were hiding, which wasn't the life either of them wanted to live. As evening approached, they began the ritual of getting ready, a process that had once been handled by teams of stylists and assistants but had now become something more intimate and collaborative. Meghan had chosen a dress she'd bought months earlier but never worn, something elegant but not flashy, sophisticated but warm, the kind of outfit that said "I'm here as myself, not as a character in someone else's story." Harry had opted for a suit that struck the right balance between formal and approachable, understanding that his appearance would be scrutinized and interpreted but refusing to let that reality dictate his choices entirely. They'd both learned that trying to control public perception was exhausting and ultimately futile, but that didn't mean they couldn't present themselves authentically. "Ready?" he asked, offering his arm as they prepared to leave their sanctuary for the evening. "As ready as I've been for anything in months," Meghan replied, and realized as she said it that it was completely true. The drive to Oprah's estate was peaceful, giving them time to settle into the evening ahead. They'd made this journey many times before, for private dinners and casual visits, but tonight felt different, charged with possibility and the strange excitement that comes from stepping back onto a stage you'd voluntarily left. When they arrived, the first thing Meghan noticed was how perfectly Oprah had managed to create an atmosphere that felt both special and comfortable. The lighting was warm and inviting, string lights creating a magical canopy over the garden where round tables had been set up for intimate conversations. There was music, but soft enough to encourage rather than compete with conversation. There were photographers, but they seemed to be capturing moments rather than hunting for dramatic shots. "This is exactly right," Harry murmured as they approached the entrance, and Meghan felt her shoulders relax in a way they hadn't in public for longer than she could remember. Oprah met them at the door, radiant in a way that made it clear this evening was deeply meaningful to her. "You came," she said, embracing them both warmly. "I wasn't entirely sure you would, even after you said yes." We almost didn't, Meghan admitted. But, then, we remembered that some things are more important than fear. As they entered the party, Meghan was struck by the diversity of the gathering. There were authors and activists, journalists and teachers, people from entertainment and education and everything in between. What they all seemed to share was a genuine interest in being present rather than being seen, in having real conversations rather than working the room. The first hour passed in a blur of introductions and reconnections. Meghan found herself talking with a high school English teacher from Oakland who had started a program bringing books to homeless shelters, a conversation that reminded her why she'd been drawn to storytelling in the first place. Harry was deep in discussion with a veteran who had written a memoir about healing from PTSD, their shared understanding creating an immediate bond. "You're glowing," said a voice behind Meghan, and she turned to find Maria, a journalist she'd known since her acting days, someone who had always been fair and thoughtful in her coverage. "I feel like myself again," Meghan replied, surprising herself with the honesty of the statement. "It shows. You both look, I don't know, lighter? More relaxed than I've seen you in years." As the evening progressed, Meghan began to understand what Oprah had meant about this event being different. People were actually listening to each other, asking follow-up questions, sharing personal stories that went beyond small talk. She found herself in a conversation with a book club organizer from Detroit who had been using literature to help women process trauma, and felt that familiar spark of connection that came from meeting someone whose work aligned with her own values. Harry was having his own revelations, finding himself surrounded by people who were curious about his work with mental health initiatives rather than his royal background. He was telling a group about the breathing exercises he'd learned from his therapist, techniques he now taught to other veterans, when he caught Meghan's eye across the garden and shared a smile that communicated everything they'd hoped this evening might become. The formal portion of the evening was brief and perfect. Oprah spoke about her book with the kind of vulnerability that made everyone in the audience feel like they were part of an intimate conversation rather than a presentation. She talked about the losses that had inspired the book, the people who had helped her find joy again, and the belief that sharing our stories could help others find their way through darkness. "Some of you in this garden tonight know what it's like to have your story told by others," she said, and, while she didn't look directly at Harry and Meghan, they felt the acknowledgement deeply. "But, we all have the power to reclaim our narratives, to find the light in our own experiences, and to offer that light to others who might be struggling to find their way." When she finished speaking, the applause was sustained but gentle, the kind of appreciation that comes from genuine emotion rather than polite obligation. Meghan felt tears in her eyes, not from sadness but from recognition, from feeling understood and seen in a way that had become increasingly rare. As the evening wound down, people began to approach Harry and Meghan, not for selfies or gossip, but to share appreciation for their work with mental health awareness, their support for various causes, their courage in choosing family over duty when that choice became necessary. These weren't fans looking for celebrity interaction, these were fellow humans offering connection and understanding. "Thank you for coming tonight," said the high school teacher Meghan had met earlier. "My students have been following your story, and seeing you here, looking happy and engaged, it means something to them." "It means something to me too." A young father approached Harry, explaining that watching him talk openly about therapy had inspired him to seek help for his own anxiety. "You probably don't realize how many people you've helped just by being honest about getting help," he said, shaking Harry's hand warmly. As they prepared to leave, Oprah pulled them aside for a private moment. "How was that for you?" she asked, and her concern was genuine, motherly in the way that had always made both Harry and Meghan feel protected in her presence. "Perfect," Meghan said immediately. "Exactly what I needed without knowing I needed it." "We'd forgotten what it felt like to be appreciated for the right reasons," Harry added. "To be in a room where people see our work instead of our drama." Oprah smiled, the kind of smile that reaches the eyes and transforms the whole face. "Well, get ready, because I have a feeling this is just the beginning. Sometimes all it takes is one reminder of who you really are to help you remember who you want to become." As they drove home through the quiet California streets, Harry and Meghan felt something they hadn't experienced together in months, shared excitement about the future. Not anxiety about what might go wrong, not worry about how their choices would be perceived, but genuine enthusiasm for the possibilities ahead. "We're good at this," Meghan said as they pulled into their driveway. "At parties?" Harry asked, grinning. At being ourselves. At connecting with people. At making a difference. We just needed to remember that we don't have to choose between authenticity and public life. We can have both, on our own terms. Inside their house, with their children sleeping peacefully and the evening's success settling around them like a warm blanket, they began to dream about what might come next, not knowing that by morning, the photos from Oprah's garden would be circulating around the world, not as gossip or scandal, but as evidence of joy, connection, and the kind of authentic happiness that no amount of criticism could diminish. The first sign that something had shifted came with Harry's morning coffee. He'd developed a routine since moving to California, waking early to check messages from various charities and organizations before the children woke up, a quiet hour of global connection before domestic chaos took over. But, this morning, his phone was buzzing with an unusual volume of notifications, and they weren't the typical mixture of criticism and support he'd grown accustomed to. "Meghan," he called softly toward the kitchen where she was preparing breakfast, "you might want to see this." She joined him on the terrace, still in her pajamas with her hair in the messy bun that had become her signature look for early mornings at home. As she scrolled through his phone, her expression shifted from curiosity to surprise to something that looked remarkably like hope. The photos from Oprah's event had indeed gone viral, but not in the way they'd both learned to expect and dread. Instead of focusing on fashion choices or body language or relationship dynamics, people were sharing images of Harry deep in conversation with the veteran, of Meghan laughing genuinely with the teacher from Oakland, of both of them listening intently as Oprah spoke about resilience and recovery. "Look at this," Meghan said, reading from one of the comments. "Finally, photos that show them actually doing what they said they wanted to do, connecting with real people about real issues. This is the Harry and Meghan I remember falling in love with." Another comment read, "You can see the joy in their faces. When was the last time we saw them look this relaxed and happy in public? More of this, please." But it was the message from the high school teacher in Oakland that made Meghan's eyes well up with tears. She had tagged them in a photo she'd taken with her students, all of them holding copies of books they were reading for their social justice literature project. "Meeting the Duchess of Sussex last night reminded me why representation matters," she'd written. "When my students see successful people who look like them caring about books and education and making the world better, it changes what they think is possible for themselves." Harry was reading messages from veterans organizations, mental health advocates, and youth programs, all expressing appreciation for the visibility he'd brought to their causes simply by showing up authentically and engaging meaningfully. "It's like people were waiting for permission to appreciate us again," he said, scrolling through responses from people whose work he'd supported quietly for years. The children appeared in the kitchen doorway, still in their pajamas and wondering why their parents were outside whispering excitedly over a phone. Archie, with the 4-year-old's supernatural ability to sense when something important was happening, walked directly to his mother and climbed into her lap. "Why are you crying, Mummy?" he asked, and Meghan realized she was indeed crying, but not from sadness or frustration or any of the complicated emotions that had accompanied media attention in recent years. "Happy tears," she explained, kissing the top of his head. "Sometimes when people say nice things about work that matters to you, it makes you feel so grateful that you cry a little." Lilibet, not wanting to be left out of any family moment, toddled over and demanded to be lifted by Harry, who scooped her up while continuing to read messages of support and connection on his phone. For a moment, they were just a family on their terrace in the morning sun, processing unexpected good news together. Over the following days, the ripple effects continued to spread in ways none of them could have anticipated. The book club organizer from Detroit had started a hashtag about using literature to process trauma, and it was being picked up by reading groups across the country. The veteran Harry had spoken with had been interviewed by a mental health podcast and mentioned how their conversation had inspired him to expand his own advocacy work. But, perhaps most significantly, invitations began arriving. Not the formal, protocol-heavy requests they'd grown used to during their royal years, but personal invitations from organizations and individuals who had genuine interest in collaboration rather than celebrity endorsement. A children's hospital in Los Angeles reached out about partnering on a storytelling program for young patients. A mental health organization in New York wanted to discuss Harry's involvement in their upcoming conference about therapy accessibility for veterans. A literacy program in their own neighborhood asked if Meghan might consider reading to children at their after-school events. It's like people remembered we have actual skills and interests beyond just showing up and waving, Meghan said during one of their evening walks, a stack of thoughtful proposals waiting for review back home. And that we care about more than just being famous, Harry added. Though I have to admit, this feels more overwhelming than criticism sometimes. People actually want to work with us now. We have to figure out how to say yes to the right things without saying yes to everything. This was a problem they hadn't anticipated having to solve. For months, they'd been focused on protecting their family from negative attention and maintaining their privacy while staying true to their values. They hadn't expected to face the challenge of managing positive attention and meaningful opportunities while maintaining the same boundaries. 3 weeks after Oprah's event, they received a call that changed everything. It was from the producer of a documentary series about global mental health initiatives, someone who had seen the photos and videos from the book launch and been struck by Harry's genuine engagement with the veteran's story. I know you've been selective about media projects, the producer explained during their video call, but this isn't really about you as personalities. It's about the work being done around the world to destigmatize mental health treatment, and we think your platform and your personal experience could help bring attention to some incredible programs that are changing lives. Harry and Meghan looked at each other across their kitchen table, communicating in the wordless way that couples develop after years together. They'd both been thinking about how to scale their impact, how to use their visibility to amplify work that mattered, but they'd been cautious about anything that felt too much like performance or celebrity. Tell us more about the programs you're featuring, Meghan said, and spent the next hour learning about therapy initiatives in refugee camps, community mental health programs in rural areas, and innovative treatments being developed for veterans with PTSD. The thing is, the producer continued, we're not looking for talking heads or celebrity endorsements. We want to show these programs in action, and we think having someone with your background and advocacy experience actually participating, learning, maybe even getting trained in some of these techniques, could help people understand that mental health support isn't just about crisis intervention. It's about building resilience and community. By the end of the call, they had agreed to spend a day visiting a local program that was training peer counselors in their community, not as celebrities making an appearance, but as students learning techniques they could potentially use in their own advocacy work. The filming day was unlike any media experience either of them had had before. Instead of staged interviews and photo opportunities, they found themselves in a circle with a dozen other people, learning breathing techniques and communication skills from a therapist who treated them exactly like any other participants in the training. This feels like the opposite of performing, Meghan whispered to Harry during a break, watching the cameras capture authentic moments of learning and connection rather than manufactured interactions. Because it is the opposite, he replied. We're actually here to learn something, not to be something. The footage from that day would eventually become part of a documentary that won awards and inspired funding for similar programs around the world. But, more immediately, it reminded both Harry and Meghan of something they'd lost track of in the chaos of the previous few years, their ability to be students as well as advocates, to learn from others while sharing their own experiences. As winter turned to spring in California, the changes that had begun at Oprah's book launch continued to evolve and expand. They found a rhythm of accepting invitations that aligned with their values and expertise while declining opportunities that felt more about celebrity than substance. They began collaborating with organizations that had been doing groundbreaking work long before their involvement, adding their platform to existing efforts rather than trying to create new initiatives from scratch. Most importantly, they rediscovered the joy that had originally drawn them to advocacy work, the energy that comes from connecting with people who share your commitment to making the world a little better, a little kinder, a little more understanding. 6 months after that January evening in Oprah's garden, they were sitting in their own garden, watching Archie and Lilibet play while reviewing invitations for the fall. There was a children's mental health conference in London, a literacy program launch in New York, a veteran support network gathering in Los Angeles, and a dozen other opportunities to contribute meaningfully to causes they cared about. Remember when we thought stepping back from royal duties meant stepping back from public impact? Meghan asked, sorting through proposals that had arrived that week from organizations around the world. I remember thinking we'd have to choose between authenticity and influence, Harry replied, watching their children's unbridled joy in simple play and feeling grateful for the life they'd built together. Turns out we just had to be more intentional about how we use both. As evening settled over their California home, they talked about the year ahead, the projects that excited them, the collaborations that could amplify work already being done by people far more expert than themselves. They talked about their children's education, their family's travel plans, their own continued learning and growth. But, mostly, they marveled at how one evening spent celebrating a friend's book about finding joy after loss had reminded them of their own capacity for resilience, connection, and hope. Sometimes the most significant changes begin with the simplest decisions, like saying yes to friendship, showing up authentically, and trusting that there are people in the world who will see your genuine intention and respond with their own. The cameras that had captured them that January evening had indeed changed everything, not because they created drama or controversy, but because they documented something much more powerful: two people choosing to be vulnerable, authentic, and present in a world that often rewards the opposite. The ripple effects of that choice would continue expanding far beyond anything they could have imagined, touching lives and inspiring connections in ways that reminded everyone involved why authentic human connection will always be more powerful than perfect public performance.